Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, a Genie Vlogger, and welcome to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I'll be watching I Took a DNA Test by Angelica Devara. This is a channel I am not familiar with at all. I took a look at her channel and it basically seems to be vlogging content, and I couldn't find anything that would give me an idea of what her ancestry is. From the way she looks, I'm assuming some sort of Southeast Asian ancestry, but honestly, she may also have a mixture beyond just Southeast Asian, because I think it showed that she lived in the US, but I'm not 100% sure. So hopefully she'll discuss her family history and we'll get an idea of what to expect. But with all that said, let's jump into the video.
So this is me.
Hey y'all!
And these are my parents. My mom is Filipino and my dad is white.
Okay, and then we get the Canadian, which, you know, we'll find out in a bit, but with Canadian ancestry, there's a couple of main migrations that usually make up Canadian. You know, French is one that a lot of people think of, but there were also a lot of Scottish people who made their way to Canada, and then, of course, a lot of people of other backgrounds as well. You know, a big melting pot like the US. But, all right, let's continue.
I'm Asian. Of course I have to bring up my mixed ancestry. And of course I had to take a DNA test to find out where in the world different parts of me originate from. So basically, my dad got this DNA test, not sponsored. I'm gonna be seeing where my roots come from. It would be so interesting seeing the different parts of the world that I'm from. And maybe I'll even see something that I won't expect.
When she started this off saying the data breach, I thought she'd be talking about 23andMe, because at the time that she was filming this, which this video came out like 7 months ago, and I think it was a little bit before that 23andMe had their big data breach. So I assumed she would have a 23andMe kit, but she seems to have an Ancestry DNA kit, which did not have a data breach as far as I can tell, as far as I know. Could be wrong on that, but just interesting. So I wonder if she's joking around about data breach or if she will talk about the 23andMe thing.
Anyways, let's go. Oh, activate to begin your story. Oh my gosh, what is this? This is the tube that I spit in. First, mouthwash.
I think they say in the guide not to use mouthwash. Maybe I'm wrong, but they say not to eat or drink anything for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes before doing the DNA test. I think mouthwash is included in that, but I could be wrong.
So while we were waiting for the results to come in, my dad sent me an email of his estimate of the results. This was his guess. We'll see later on how accurate it was.
Okay, so let's go back. I've attached the latest update of estimated time of delivery of DNA results. Also an estimate of your percentage, my best guess. So 50% Philippines, which in our experience with the Philippines, at least on this channel, I don't have much experience beyond that really, just a tad. But basically, it could be a mixture of Southeast Asian. I remember there was one test we saw that had a really nuanced breakdown where it had like Western Visayas and Luzon and other in like central Philippines and stuff like that, which I didn't even know the names of the areas in the Philippines. Now I do, thanks to that. I can't remember if it was Ancestry, but if it was, we may see a pretty nuanced breakdown there. But at the very least, we'll probably see it broken as like about 50% Asian ancestry. So knowing how the Philippines also has a mixed history, we may see Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. And on top of that, with the Philippines, there's always that question of Spanish ancestry. Most people I hear from that come from the Philippines especially will say that it's very minimal how much the Spanish mix with people, and so it's not like a super common thing, like where, you know, people who are African American, you can almost always expect they're going to have some European, somewhere between like 10 and 15%. Whereas with the Philippines, you may find people with Spanish ancestry, but it's not like a common thing you're going to find all the time. So we may see some Spanish. So if we see, especially like Iberian readings and more than 50%, well more than 50% European, that could indicate Spanish ancestry coming from that Filipino side of hers. In terms of the other stuff, it's kind of an interesting breakdown that he's giving, which makes me wonder if maybe her dad is like super into genealogy, because Eastern Europe, Russia, 23%. Unless, I guess, you know what I should say? Maybe this is his actual DNA results, but maybe it's not. I don't know for sure. The way that it's kind of worded and the way she worded it in the video was a little confusing. But Eastern Europe, Russia, 23%, includes Poland, Ukraine, yeah. Germanic, 10%, includes Switzerland, Netherlands, Germany, yes, Low Countries. Ireland, 7%, Scotland, 6%, England, 3%, France, 1%, could include Belgium. And technically, a lot of these can include a lot more than just that. It's just this is where they most commonly find it in the present day populations. So
results. This was his guess. We'll see later on how accurate it was.
Yeah, I can't read the full thing, but you may have DNA from spam. We shall see. So at least we got a little bit of nuance. Not quite as much as I'd really like, especially because I can't tell if his results are DNA-wise or not or what, but...
Okay, y'all, so my DNA results came back. So we're gonna be seeing where I actually am from. I don't know much of the history or any significant information that I could give you. I wish I could go on a whole tangent about everything I know about my ancestry, but I'm just as new to this as you, probably.
Well, I'm not new to this, not by a long shot, but I will say that you could spend some time to find out a lot about this ancestry, especially the European side. I would imagine you're going to be able to trace that back at least to the 1800s, if not further. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to do that with your Filipino ancestry, but I imagine it's possible, and I know people who specialize in Filipino genealogy, so I'd imagine you may be able to. But at the very least, just spending time building out your family tree and trying to pull records, and so much stuff is online and freely available for people that it's really a lot easier than most people think. Like when I hang out with friends and stuff and I pull up records for them just like on my phone, it'll be really crazy how they're like mind blown. And to me, it's like, dude, it really took me literally like a minute to do this. I just needed the basic info from you. Like a lot of times I'll tell people, if you had a grandparent in the US born before 1940, or even a parent born in the US before 1940, you'll probably be able to build out the family tree fairly easily because you'll very likely be able to find them in the census. Did I say 1940? I meant 1950. So if your parents were born before 1950, you'll probably find them in the census, and then you can just start tracing back. But even more, there's way more than census records. There's draft records, there's birth records, marriage records, death records, wills, naturalizations, deeds, all sorts of stuff, and a lot of it free online.
Okay, so first, 29% Central and Southern Philippines. Oh my gosh, look at that. All the way.
So I don't think this was the one we saw where it had a really nuanced breakdown, or at least if this was, they've done another update since then, which is possible. But this does seem about what it was, where in terms of Central and Southern Philippines, so we are getting a nuance within the Philippines, and then they have a breakdown of what they call your journey. Some sites will call this like genetic communities or other things like that. But basically the things right under Central and Southern Philippines, the Visayas and Mindanao, and the Southern Samar and Eastern Leyte, don't know if I'm pronouncing those right, but those are determined using her DNA matches. So the percentage, the 29%, that's just saying 29% of her DNA correlates with the present population that is defined as Central and Southern Philippines. And when I mean the present population, like the present day, like the people alive now, they test them, say that that's the ancestry as far as they know for their entire family. So they find what's the common DNA between all of them. And then whatever DNA she has that's common with that, that's the percentage she gets. But then underneath that, the Visayas and Mindanao and the other Southern Samar and Eastern Leyte, that's by looking at her DNA matches and seeing where do they say in their family tree that's connected to their DNA where their family's from. So a bunch of them say the Visayas and Mindanao and Southern Samar and Eastern Leyte, and thus she's getting that.
Way down here. Just different parts of the Philippines, which is expected. So yeah, I'm exactly 50% Filipino.
Okay, so yeah, we get the 29%, 7% Northern, 14% Western, and then the other breakdown, Germanic Europe, Eastern Europe and Russia, and then the Scotland.
Germanic Europe, 27% German, somewhat Netherlands. Okay, cool. Eastern Europe, yeah, so mostly like Polish, Ukrainian.
So what they're showing in these maps here is just the darker the area, the more correlated this DNA is to that present day population. So her ancestry could be from elsewhere beyond this, and it just happens that present day populations in these areas happen to have it. So like, even though Belarus isn't really that colored that much up there, that's where her family might have come from. They could have come from anywhere here. So that's the thing with these admixture percentages, is they give you just a really blurry image. Like, even the maps that they're showing to kind of help you get an idea, even those are kind of simplified themselves to make it easier to understand.
Do I look it? Do I look it? I'm 9% Scottish. Dang, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's cool. Nice.
See, that's the thing, too, is when you do the percentages, it's like, okay, cool, I guess here and here and here, whatever. But you don't have any of the story. You don't know what your ancestors went through and what their lives were like. And that's where the genealogy really comes in. And especially when it comes to the DNA test, a lot of people be like, oh, well, the percentages, they're not that trustworthy. And in a sense, yes, they're correct. But the thing is that the true power of these DNA tests are the DNA matches. You find DNA matches and you know that you and that person share an ancestor somewhere in the past. There's small probabilities that some matches might be false positive, but that's usually when you're getting into the like really small matches where you're sharing very little DNA. But for a lot of matches, especially, you know, second cousins and first cousins and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to tell quite quickly that they're a significant match. And so you use those DNA matches and look at their tree and your tree and try to figure out where you connect. And that's how you're able to get past areas where the paper trail might not be there to prove that connection, but instead the DNA helps prove it. And then you can learn about ancestors that you would have never otherwise discovered. But what would you rather learn? Would you rather just learn that you're 23% Germanic European? Or would you rather learn that your great-great-grandfather lived in this town and was there during this war and experienced this and lived through this crazy event? A great example of some of the stuff that I've found in people's family trees was ancestors who were part of Napoleon's invasion of Russia, people that were Volga Germans that were moved from Alsace-Lorraine area that was part of Germany at that time to then the Volga River in Russia, or people that had ancestors that migrated from Ireland to the US in the 1800s and then ended up fighting in the Civil War. And literally these specific stories of what they did and what their lives were like. And these are your ancestors. And it's when you learn that stuff, I feel like people get the best true connections to their family history. But I'm kind of curious what her father's input's going to be. A little bit of history and insight, so that should be interesting.
So I just wanted to try some video clips, talking about the understanding behind DNA and some insights about it. I was interested in doing a DNA test through you.
When he says you, he means me.
He sounds so Canadian.
If I did it through you, then you could find out about both sides of our family, about your mom and your dad. So it revealed a few things. No surprise that on your mom's side of the family, it's 100% Philippines. There was some question, could some have come from Spain? It's possible, but it doesn't show with regards to the DNA test that you had.
And that's a good point, because even though she didn't get the Spanish in her DNA results, her mom might test and her mom might end up getting like 4% Spanish or 5% or something. And it just means that she didn't inherit any of that Spanish DNA from her mom. So that's one big consideration, is that even though she's not getting it, doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean it's there either, but still, it's undetermined in a sense.
And one thing about DNA that people say is that DNA never lies. So a couple things about why people move around. Let's look, for example, at your Filipino ancestry. It comes from 3 different areas. And what that tells me is that your ancestors from the Philippines were kind of like dreamers and risk takers. They wanted to explore different islands. A lot of people back then, they did it because of trading. From your European side, the reason why your ancestor traveled was they were avoiding some pain. For example, religious persecution. There were some Mennonites who flee Eastern Europe from Ukraine, actually, because they were persecuted because of their religious beliefs.
So this is where we're getting into actual family story, the true genealogy. Would she have ever been able to learn about this through just looking at the DNA percentages? No way. But the DNA percentages help support what they know about the family tree. And when it comes to the percentages being genealogically useful, they're usually most genealogically useful when it's something that you weren't expecting that might be significant. So a great example is I did the family tree of Steve Heimler from Heimler's History, and he had this 12% Jewish reading that he'd never heard of a Jewish ancestry. Well, 12% of this is the same amount of DNA you'd expect from a great-grandparent. So I looked through all 8 of his great-grandparents and was able to determine that one of them was truly Jewish and uncover that entire family history story tracing back to the 1700s. Actually, one of the lines tracing to a known Napoleonic Russian invasion soldier. Well, we weren't 100% sure that he was necessarily part of the invasion, but he probably was part of the army in some sort of way. But main point being that the genealogy, the true family history, that's really where you get the meat and potatoes.
Same with the Huguenots. They came from Germany, they went to France, and then they fled from France to North America, and also from Ireland. So it doesn't appear that you have any DNA from Ireland. Well, that's because they originally came from Germany, then they went to Ireland, and then because of the potato famine, they traveled to North America.
Now, one thing with that, what he said in terms of not getting any of the Irish ancestry, that could be a reason why not getting into the Irish, but at the same time, that might also be read as Scottish DNA. And that's one of the difficulties with the DNA admixtures, especially when you get into regions that have a lot of population flow through history, Northwestern Europe being one of the main ones. You basically get a lot of people where it's really hard to decipher. Is it truly Irish? Is it Scottish? Is it Welsh? Is it English? And you'll find some of these sites that will lump those together. Now, most of the sites seem to be trying to really get that nuanced in their readings so that it's not, English, Welsh, and Scottish. It's a specific English reading, a specific Welsh reading, a specific Scottish, a specific Irish, etc. But some of the sites you may see them kind of lumped together because they didn't feel that they could confidently tell you that, yes, this is coming from Ireland or Scotland, so they might just lump it together. So that is one possibility too. Even if they don't lump it together, you might have Irish ancestry and it's not a Germany to Ireland sort of thing. It's actually was in Ireland for many, many generations. But there's a genetic connection through that Scottish side, and so it might be being read as Scottish. So that is one thing with the DNA admixtures. You have to consider all the hypotheses, all the possibilities, and when you know the family tree, that's when you can start tying the family tree to the admixture stuff. So it seems like he actually knows the family history, talking about Mennonite ancestry and Huguenot ancestry, which both of those I think make a lot of sense from what I understand about Canadian ancestry, and so I'm guessing that's the Canadian ancestry they come from.
Finally, one of the groups, especially with your great-grandparents, they fled from Poland, which was part of Germany during World War II, to escape the war, and then they came to Alberta. Somewhat of a surprise. The majority from my side of the family was from Germanic Europe, but if you look at the map that was provided by Ancestry, it showed the darkest region came from Netherlands.
Doesn't mean that their ancestry is in the Netherlands. It's just saying that when they're defining this population group, that's where that DNA is correlating the strongest. So could they have ancestry that goes to the Netherlands? It's certainly possible, but it's not a conclusion that you could make just from this.
Which kind of makes sense because if I looked at our family tree, you could trace back 500 years to a group of people from the Netherlands. Probably eventually they went to Germany and then they made their way across the ocean to North America.
Okay, so they also have traits. Let's go through this. This is so cool. So if I drink alcohol, my face wouldn't flush. My face wouldn't go red. I mean, I don't plan on drinking alcohol, honestly, ever. I just didn't like the smell, and I don't foresee myself engaging in that. Okay, unable to spell. What is this? Asparagus? Okay, cool. I am less naturally athletic. See, it's in my genes. It's in my genes. I'm so not athletic at all. Anyways, I don't really know what else to say. That was pretty cool. If you have any comments or anecdotes or anything, feel free to add a comment. This is a little different from my usual content, but I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Stay happy, stay motivated, keep shining, and God bless you.
Okay, that was a decent video. Not the most amazing one, but the addition from her father really, really added a lot to this. Obviously, I would have loved to have seen her go through the DNA matches. At the end there, I don't know if I'm going to include any of the traits stuff, but I skipped a lot of it because we really don't care about traits that much on this channel. It's all about the genealogy and the ancestry. So if you want to check out the traits part, go check out her original video. But I thought it was really cool how her father really added a lot of nuance to what he knows about his family tree and the readings that she's getting. Now, in the beginning, when he gave that percentage breakdown, it seemed like he had done a DNA test himself, and so it would have been really cool to see his DNA results, because when you get an older generation's results, you get a much more nuanced view, because remember, she's only getting 50% of her dad's DNA. So there's a whole other 50% of his DNA she didn't inherit, so if she has his DNA test, then she's going to get a much more nuanced breakdown of her European ancestry. Because one thing a lot of people don't really consider is that you do have your inherited DNA, and that's how they're getting these percentages, but there's a lot of DNA from your ancestors that you didn't inherit that is going to represent specific lines of your family that you're just not going to find out if you didn't inherit that DNA. Of course, unless you do the genealogy, but that's a whole different story. So that would have been cool, as well as the DNA matches, but having kind of the history part of things and showing how, yes, that correlates to what we do know about our family history, and even looking at the population history like he was talking about with his Irish history and knowing that it somehow came from Germany, I believe it was. And that's something people really need to consider, like people who come from Volga German ancestry. Yes, you have ancestors who lived in Russia, sometimes for multiple generations, but you do a DNA test, you're probably not going to get that much Russian DNA unless you had a local Russian who married into that Volga German family for some reason. And then one last thing to say in terms of the Filipino ancestry is that it would be interesting to see her do an Asian-based DNA test, because the Asian-based DNA tests have a much more nuanced breakdown of Asian results. I don't know if it's super nuanced for the Philippines, but I know in terms of like China and Japan and Korea and stuff like that, it is much more nuanced, but I believe it's much more nuanced for all of Asia. So 23 Mafong and Weijin are the two big ones that we often refer about. And if you enjoyed this reaction and you'd like to see another just like it, be sure to check out this video of mine right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.